Hey lady, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Trisha Stefankowitz. On our episode today, we are going to explore this idea of self-monitoring and the power that it has in an effort to make any behavior changes that we desire, especially when it comes to our health journey. Oftentimes on social media, there's so much information about eating more protein and drinking more water, but nobody actually goes into the nitty gritty of how they're able to maintain these behaviors over time to actually achieve the goal. And self-monitoring is one of those things that typically people are doing in order to figure out what is working for them, what isn't working for them, what emotional patterns are happening that are preventing them from meeting the goal that they want. And then more importantly, having some kind of monitoring of what is working for you or what isn't working or what's sabotaging you can give you some valuable insights and help you make informed choices so that you can stay consistent with your goals. Welcome to the Whole Health Empowerment Project podcast. This show is for women over 40 who are trying to create balance in their life when it comes to food, body, self-care, and wellness. You struggle to put yourself first, to maintain consistency when something isn't perfect, or maybe you feel like you don't have enough time or willpower to achieve the goals you desire. I'm your host, Trisha Stefankowitz, registered dietitian, nutritionist. I've worked with women like you achieve their goals by focusing on the next best step, no matter how messy, and meeting you where you are right now. In this show, you'll learn practical information, actionable strategies, and mindset tweaks so that you can feel healthier, more comfortable in your body, and make choices that work for your life. Come join me in failing forward, one imperfect step at a time, into the journey of health, wellness, and self-care. Welcome to your new project. I know when I'm saying self-monitoring, you're like, ugh. And it typically is something that maybe you start off doing, but then you stop, or maybe it's one of those things that you keep track of what you're eating today or how much you're exercising in your head, but you're not actually going back at the ends of the week and looking at what you actually did versus what you think you did. Some of the benefits of self-monitoring and why it can be really important when it comes to achieving the health goal that you desire is that when you're logging things like what you're eating or how much you're working out, or you're recording how much water you're drinking or the emotions that you felt that led to certain behaviors, it can bring awareness to those habits and behaviors. It can help you identify what's working, what needs an adjustment. It can help boost your motivation to continue forward. It can help you increase your accountability and provide a sense of control over your progress. When you're able to track your actions, you can start to create this connection between what you're doing on a daily basis and what that is doing and what that progress is onto the long-term result that you have, making it much easier to stay consistent and committed to your overall health journey. For me, I'm always trying to make sure that I'm eating a certain way, like a certain amount of protein or a certain amount of fiber, and then also making sure that I'm working out, right? Doing strength training. And sometimes I find myself in this place where if I'm not logging or I've not logged in a couple of days in terms of food, my perception of what I ate is probably very different than what I actually did. And the same in terms of my workouts. If I am in my head, I could be thinking, oh, I worked out like 4 or 5 days last week. But when I actually go into the app that tracks my workout, I realize, oh, I only did 3 or 4 days and maybe I wanted to do a little bit more. So it brings a little bit more clarity, honesty, so that when I'm not achieving my goals, or even when I am achieving my goals, I can see what's working and what isn't. And it takes me out of this place of like, I'm doing everything and nothing's working. Because if I can get honest and see what I've actually done, then I can make adjustments and be like, oh, okay, I didn't actually do the things that I told myself or I thought that I was going to do. And maybe you've found yourself in that place too, where you think you're doing something when it comes to your health goal, but you've maybe changed it in your mind, or maybe other things got in the way and you didn't really do what you thought you did. And so some key benefits to having and monitoring yourself is that number one, it can improve awareness. If you're tracking your food, if you're tracking your physical activity, if you're tracking your emotions, it helps you understand the patterns that you're doing on a daily basis. It helps you understand some of the things that are triggering you to maybe take you away from the behaviors that you're trying to do. And so much of this, we get so focused on this bigger picture of eating our carbs and avoiding, or eating our protein and avoiding our carbs and doing physical activity. But there's these mundane everyday behaviors that are going to probably have way more of an impact than that bigger picture. And I think this is where self-monitoring comes into play, because you're going to create more awareness, which is going to help create consistency and get you to the goal that you desire. The second benefit of monitoring what you're doing is that there is an increased accountability. If you don't have an accountability partner, you can be accountable to yourself, but you have to have some kind of level of honesty about what you're doing. And if you're able to write it down somewhere, or to have a place that you can go back and look at what you've actually done for the week, for the month, for the year, as you're logging those habits, it can make you more responsible for the choices that you've done. It's a way that you are making yourself accountable to you. And then number three, that enhances motivation. As you start to see progress, even these small improvements, it's going to keep you encouraged. It's going to keep you moving forward and moving closer to the goal that you are trying to achieve. So instead of relying on motivation to come whenever it feels like, if you're able to be accountable to yourself, have that awareness of what you are actually doing, that is what's going to increase the motivation to continue forward, rather than just waiting for motivation to kind of come out of thin air. You will have better decision making when you're able to monitor what you're doing. You're going to have real data. And I think this can be really important with health changes, because so often, especially for women, and especially if weight loss is the goal that you have, it's so easy to make choices or think things about ourselves based on shame and based on previous behaviors that maybe didn't work for us, and how that can sometimes hinder us from moving forward. But if you're able to have real data to say, oh, I actually didn't work out last Tuesday, and I actually ate a little bit differently than I thought I did, and to not judge that, well, that's where you're going to be able to really make an informed decision and adjust your approach. If you're trying to adjust your approach based on shame and what you should have done, it's going to be very hard for you to make a good decision, because you're stuck in all of those emotions. But if you're able to have some real data, and data doesn't have judgment and shame on it, it's just numbers and figures, well, you're going to be able to adjust your approach without having that data, without having that shame and judgment. And so data is just giving you information, and it's not information with judgment, it's just information. And then the fifth benefit here is that with this improved awareness and accountability and motivation and data, you're going to be more committed to the goals that you've set. This act of self-monitoring reinforces the importance of what you're doing. It reinforces the importance of what this health journey means to you. Self-monitoring can be anything. that is going to help you achieve your goal. It can be logging meals, tracking workouts, tracking how much water or hydration you're doing, journaling your emotions. It can be writing it down in a journal or a planner. It can be using a mobile app like MyFitnessPal or anything that's going to track behaviors. It can be your Apple Watch. Self-monitoring is going to bring awareness to your habits, your behaviors, and help you identify what's working, what needs to be adjusted. And then that can boost your motivation, increase your accountability, and provide a sense of control over your progress. One of the things that I think we often do, at least I know I'm guilty of this, is that I may track what I'm doing, but then I never go back and reflect on it. And I think this is where it can be really important because, again, you could be monitoring, but then not looking back. And when you don't make the progress that you think you should have made, it's helpful to go back and see what the data is telling you versus what your brain is telling you or what you think you did. Some key areas here that might be important or that may help you when it comes to a health change are things like your food intake, keeping a journal of what are some of the compositions of the food you're eating. So here it doesn't have to necessarily be calories. It can be what your protein intake is, what your fiber intake is. What does that look like for you? Are you maintaining some kind of nutritional balance? Most people, especially when it comes to food, because we don't really know what a portion size is, we haven't quite learned that yet. We underestimate how much we eat. And so if we're able to just log what our food is, then we can start to see some patterns emerging. And then that can be really helpful. It's so interesting about portion sizes because I recently bought a food scale, and I'll do an episode about this later, but I started weighing even my protein sources, and it's so interesting how different it is from what I think it is in my brain. And so when I'm logging food, I may be logging that I'm having so many ounces of protein, but it's completely different when I look at it on the scale. So sometimes I think just that idea that you're logging it, then you can go back and say, oh, okay, I need to be a little bit more specific for that. And so that's where it becomes important, is that you can start to see a pattern emerging. And then with that pattern, you can start to explore that a little bit more and go deeper to figure out, okay, am I emotional eating here? Are there certain nutrients that maybe I'm deficient in that I can see I'm not eating enough of? Am I eating too much of one thing and not something else? Am I emotionally eating? So there's information and data that can be gleaned from actually monitoring that. Physical activity is something that can be really helpful too, especially if you're trying to have a goal of having more energy, maybe less postmenopausal or perimenopausal anxiety. Tracking your workouts or daily movement may help you see how active you truly are and figure out where that aligns with the goal that you set. You could be counting steps. You can be logging your workouts. You could be monitoring how many days a week you're strength training. All of this is a way, when you're logging it or monitoring it, you can start to see what is fact versus what is reality. And again, we're using this as a data point, not to have emotions about whether you're doing something more or less and having judgment around it, but just seeing where you are at right now and what your baseline may have been and what you desire for the future. Another thing that can be helpful to track is your weight and body measurements. We know, we talk about this on here, that this scale is often the one thing that we use as our measure of progress. But we know that it's not really telling us, the scale, what our daily habits are. And so some things that can be more important and can be more valuable would be to measure your waist circumference. Try to figure out how your clothes fit or what your clothes are telling you, especially if you're in a place that you're doing more strength training. That weight loss or those changes in your body composition reflective of the weight training that you're doing may not be reflected in your weight. It may be more reflected in your hip and waist circumference ratio, or perhaps what your muscle tone looks like, or what your circumference of your tricep or your abdominal muscle, like that's where you're going to really start to see progress versus just the scale. And if you rely just on the scale, then you may feel like what you're doing isn't working. And so it's a way that you can really start to see and give yourself accurate information versus just the scale. Hydration and sleep become increasingly important when it comes to perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. We know that proper hydration and quality sleep play a key role in any health behavior when it comes to weight loss or just maintaining your overall health. So if you struggle in any of those areas, then logging your water intake daily and what your sleep patterns can be. And I know people use like an Oura Ring or they use their Apple Watch. It's just a way that you can start to see what you're doing and what you think you're doing, and if you need to make some adjustments there. Especially when it comes to sleep, you can really start to see areas and highlight areas for improvement. And maybe you can also, it will just influence what you're doing as a precursor before you go to sleep, right? And so logging hydration and sleep can be really important. And then lastly, I would say monitoring your mood, your emotions, your stress levels. These can be also things that you can track. If you're able to understand your emotional triggers, then you can figure out what it is that may be leading to overeating, if that's something that you're prone to. You can start to figure out if you're skipping workouts, why is it that you're doing that? You may explore that you maybe need to figure out there's some other coping strategies that might be helpful for you. Keeping some kind of journal or some kind of monitoring of what your mood looks like throughout the day, what your stress levels look like, and how you respond to those can help identify some habits that you're doing and maybe start to help you figure out if there's something else that may work a little bit better than what you are presently doing. Or vice versa, you may feel like, okay, I have this. For the first time ever, I've figured out this is what I do when I'm stressed and what can I do differently for that. Some tips for you when it comes to being really effective with your self-monitoring is to be consistent. Track what you want to do in terms of your health goal and do it consistently so that you can have the most accurate insight into your behavior. And use tools that work for you. You could use apps or journals or wearable devices just to make everything easier for you in a world which can seem so busy. We have so many things that are at our fingertips in terms of things that give us information, yet I don't think we ever go back and look at the information and actually interpret it and figure out what works for our life. Another thing with all of this, when we're talking about self-monitoring, that I think we need to also say here is that there's no judgment with the data that you receive. It's not about judging yourself. It's about learning about yourself and learning about why you do something and what might work a little bit better for you. And how you're going to do that is you're going to keep looking at what you're doing, reviewing it, and adjusting it to make necessary changes so that you're really trying to figure out what works for you. Because remember, like this whole health journey, there's going to be these like basic key points in life. And as you go through perimenopause and menopause, they're not going to change, right? You're still going to eat protein. You're still going to eat fiber. You're still going to need to manage your stress, and your hydration is going to need to be on point. But really here is digging into what works for you, because this journey, even with these general guidelines, is very specific to you. And what works for somebody else may not work for you. So it's a way that you can start to hone in on to what individually works for you and what skills and what apps and what different things that help you may not help somebody else. So this is the process of exploring that I think for a lot of women, it feels really hard to do this because life is already so stressful. So it's now feels like an added burden. But if you're able to kind of keep track, I think you're able to really see your progress. And then it feels almost a little bit more hopeful that you'll be able to achieve the goal that you want to do. I mean, I'm trying to think about even me, like what really helps me is if I sit down on a Sunday and I review my week and I plan my week ahead. And I think I've said this on here before. My mom has metastatic cancer and we are doing palliative treatment for her. And so I haven't been doing this as consistently as I previously had been doing, which is something I'm working on. And I notice a difference in my week when I don't have the planning period to see what my week looks like, and then this review period to see what works and what didn't work. And when I'm in my head about it, I think that I've done more than I've actually done. And when I go back and I look at the actual data of what I've done, it's not. It's different. And it might not even be different in a big way, but it's different enough that if I'm not achieving the goals, I can see why. And it's just helpful to do that because then it puts it back in my control. It's not leaving this feeling of like, I'm doing everything and I'm not achieving what I want. It's actually like, oh, I actually am not doing some of the things that I could be doing to get to my goal and to manage my stress. And so that's where all of this self-monitoring is meant to help you, because it takes away the judgment that it doesn't feel doable and it puts it back on you because it's based on data and not the judgment and the shame. Some of the barriers here, why we don't like to self-monitor, is because it requires effort. It can feel restrictive. It can bring up uncomfortable truths about ourselves when it comes to our own habits. By checking in with ourselves, it can be discouraging if progress is slower than expected, especially if we are doing all of the things that we think we're doing and we're not getting the progress that we want. It can be really frustrating to keep looking back and saying, gosh, I'm doing everything and I'm not moving towards the goal that I want. But one of the things here is that if you're able to view tracking as a tool rather than like a learning tool versus a tool to judge yourself, it can make the process much more effective for you when it comes to achieving your goals. When it comes to time constraints, which is probably one of the biggest barriers to monitoring your behavior, is that most people don't feel like they have enough time to log their meals or to log their workouts or to write down what their emotions are. And so for you, I would say to use something that's very quick that you have with you all the time. You could have a checklist or an automatic tool that's already on your phone, like some kind of exercise tracker, or you can have a voice note or write yourself a text message so that you can start to see what you're actually doing. It can feel restrictive. And so some people may feel like that takes away from any of the spontaneity of what they're doing. But if you're able to focus on being flexible here, that you're logging general trends rather than obsessing over every detail, that might make it easier for you to do the logging and the self-monitoring without feeling that it's too restrictive. You may not want to self-monitor because you may feel like, oh gosh, I'm going to have all this judgment about myself. I'm going to feel guilty about the choices that I made, and that might lead you to feel like you want to avoid this behavior altogether. But again, recognizing this self-monitoring as a tool that's in your toolbox, that it's creating awareness into your habits, and that awareness is going to get you closer to your goal. rather than focusing on this as some kind of punishment, that's going to allow you to start to see the link between what you're doing and whether yes or no you're working towards your goals. And also it's going to allow you to celebrate the progress that you've done, because a lot of times we don't do this. But if you're able to reflect back on your week, then you can be like, oh my gosh, I did this. I cannot believe I walked this many steps. And so it can be also really helpful to make you focus on those small achievements that you've made, and then to continue to work on them so that you get closer to the goal that you want. One of the other hindrances here is that if you don't get the immediate results that you want, then you may feel like your motivation is waning, especially when tracking doesn't yield that instant result that you're looking for. And so here again is looking at some of the bigger picture changes that you're having, especially if you're working on weight loss, that you could be logging what you're doing and not actually seeing the benefits on the scale. But this is where it's going to be important, because then you can start to use other metrics to say, oh, well, my waist is different, or it's smaller, or my energy levels are better, or I'm having improved sleep. My mood is better. When you're able to log or monitor, you're able to kind of get that connection. And then you can start to take that focus more off the scale and look at as like the bigger picture here and what the benefits are, versus sticking to just weight and feeling like that what you're doing isn't working. You may feel like self-monitoring can be too difficult because it feels like it's too much technology, and that can be really overwhelming. And so choosing a method that works for you, whether it's a paper journal, a habit tracker, some kind of app, we know that it's going to require some kind of effort, and that can feel restrictive or bring up uncomfortable truths about your own habits. And it can also be discouraging if progress is slower than you expect it to be. But if you're able to overcome these barriers by viewing tracking or monitoring as a learning tool rather than a judgment tool, this can make the process more effective for you. It can just help you kind of stay on target rather than doing this thing where you're stopping and you're starting and you don't really know what is causing you to do this. It's going to give you more insight into your behaviors. And I do a combination. I have a weekly planner that I look back at every week, and I also use if I'm tracking my protein, or if I'm tracking my fiber or my calories, I also will use MyFitnessPal. It just depends on what I'm working on that week. So let's talk about the importance of regularly checking in with yourself and how to make this a habit for you. Well, we know that if you're able to check in with yourself regularly, it can help you stay aligned with the goals that you have. You can start to recognize progress or what's hindering your progress, and it allows you to make these necessary adjustments. And last week we talked about neuroplasticity, and I think it kind of plays into this too, that you can start to see what you're doing, what's working, and the more you practice that, the more you're creating a new pathway in your brain to continue that progress. And it's not something when we're making this behavior change that we don't think about, or that is easy. It's one of these things that you're making progress or not making progress, and then you're pivoting and adjusting. And this is the part that people don't like. Nobody, we just want to follow this linear journey that just gets us to where we want to go. But oftentimes that's not really how it's going to go. It's going to go like you take one step forward, 2 steps back. But in doing that, this is where you're going to be able to take the necessary steps and make the adjustments that work for you, individualized for you, to help prevent other setbacks turning into major obstacles and you getting closer to your goal. So regular check-ins will help maintain accountability. That regular reflection is going to help you stay mindful of what your progress is and keep you motivated. It's going to prevent you from slipping back into old habits. And also, you're going to be able to identify these small changes early so that if you start to feel yourself slipping back into old behaviors, you can start to identify that versus identifying it 3 months down the road because you're not having that insight. It's going to encourage mindful decision making, and it's going to help reinforce what you're doing and what your choices are and why those choices are important to you. And then it's going to boost your motivation. It's going to help you see the motivation. It's going to help you see the progress that you're making, no matter how small, which is going to help you keep doing it to stay on target with the goal that you want to achieve. Let's talk about some ways to make regular check-ins or having this self-monitoring become a habit for you. I think the most important thing is to schedule it. Set a reminder on your phone or your calendar, or check in with yourself around the same day, the same time, so that it just becomes more of what you do on a weekly basis. For me, I usually tend to do that on a Sunday. I usually am making my meals and I like to check in with myself. That seems to work best. And I usually take out my planner and I look at what I've done and what my goals are for the future and for the week. And so maybe that's a way that works for you. Maybe you're somebody who's more digital, and so you may need to do something differently. Maybe you're just looking at your phone and trying to figure out what your week looked like. Use it and make this process as simple for yourself as possible. If you need to do like a quick voice memo or send yourself a text message to see what you've been doing, or put some notes in an app, then after you schedule it, you kind of make sure that you go back into those things instead of just putting something into an app and never looking at it again. You want to make sure that you're scheduling a time so that you can go back and check it out. Be honest with yourself and be kind with yourself. Focus on learning from the patterns rather than having judgment and criticizing yourself for it. Celebrating some of the wins that you may not have gotten as far as you wanted this week, but you made progress, and acknowledge that, because these small achievements are going to be very necessary to help you stay motivated, especially when you're in a time that you may be feeling unmotivated or not doing as much as you want to. Just know that by monitoring, that's progress, because maybe you didn't do that in the past. And then the more important thing here is to use checking in with yourself as a tool to adjust and pivot when you feel like you need to, so that you can make these small sustainable plans and changes to what your plan is, so that you don't veer off track, and that it can help you stay in line with what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so the bottom line here is that self-monitoring or tracking yourself, or having some way to see where you are now, what you've done for the week, what you want to do in the future, it empowers you to take control of your health journey. By tracking your habits and identifying your patterns, and by celebrating your progress and pivoting and making sustainable lifestyle changes, this is what's gonna help you stay motivated, stay consistent, and create awareness into what you're doing and the results that you're achieving. So what is something that you can do today when it comes to self-monitoring? Are you going to track your food, track your activity, track some of your emotions, track your social media use? What is it that you're going to do? And when are you going to schedule time to look back at what you've done for the week? I know that on like a Sunday, I always get those insights into how much time I was on my social media. So what does that look like for you? Is it on a Sunday, or is it something that you need to schedule so that you can look back and see what progress you've had? And, those insights about how much time you've been on social media, why they can be helpful is they just like pop up. And so maybe you need to have something that pops up as a reminder for you that this is what you want to do, and that this is what you need to do in order to schedule a time for you. So either write yourself a note or have something maybe remind you or have a regularly scheduled time that you go back and look at what you've done for the week. So thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys back here next week. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you found value in this podcast, please rate, review, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends. Together, we can take tiny, imperfect steps towards creating the whole health we desire and deserve. Don't forget to grab your freebie. You can find the link in your show notes or over at triciard.com. I'll see you back here next week.